Hey, Miguel Dorati back here on the CRP, and it's always fight week, and it's fight week again. This time, the UFC 40 hits us July 27th, and I'm joined by my sidekick and partner, Devin Miller, to talk about the main events for UFC 40. Devin, this card comes to us from up north in Canada. It's going to be on ESPN Plus this Saturday. You guys can check your local listings for start times there. And, in the main event, we've got featherweight title action, the return of Max Holloway to the weight class. Frankie Edgar getting a shot, maybe a few years too late, but still a big name in the weight class. So technically we got a major fight on our hands this weekend. What do you think?
I think a lot of things on this. And number one, I think people are really underestimating an old vet like Frankie Edgar. I'm not sure that Max Holloway has fought somebody that is as good at transitioning from boxing to wrestling like Frankie Edgar is. Especially when you accompany that with the amount of experience that Frankie has. And that's the one thing that really pops out to me in this fight. But I think the bigger overall story is how do we get here, Miguel? We look at this is a really weird time to have this pay per view. You're having it right in between two of the biggest cards of the year, the August card and the International Fight Week card that we just had. And this is doomed on the spot to it's definitely going to be the weakest of these three pay per views. It's got the weakest card, and when it comes to ticket sales, pay per view buys, it's going to be the smallest revenue fight as well. And but they needed a main event to throw in here, and they picked Max Holloway, who's coming off a very hard loss up at lightweight to the now interim champion Dustin Poirier. And that was a very hard, gritty fight that he took a lot of damage in. Max is a guy that's very beloved by fans. He might be one of the most liked guys in the sport right now. He was on a 13-fight win streak going into that fight. They tried to move him up. He's on everybody's pound-for-pound list. And now here they are. They're gonna try to reinvent him. Well, not really reinvent him, but repurpose him as the featherweight king. And instead of bringing him in and having him fight these younger contenders that are coming up that I think are down the line for him if he can keep making this weight, Volkanovski, obviously, Zabit Magomedsharipov, you got Yair Rodriguez, you got guys like Calvin Kattar coming up, that guy that just won, Josh Emmett, just won a couple weeks ago. These are good young fighters that are coming up in this division. You got the Korean Zombie who's on a good run. But none of those really strike the nerve, I think, in the casual audience, like bringing in an old vet and giving him one last shot like Frankie Edgar. Because a Frankie Edgar matchup with Max Holloway, this is a fight that, by all indications, Max Holloway's for sure the favorite to win this fight and should be. And Frankie Edgar's got some name value. And it's going to be another person that Max Holloway can add on his hit list in this division and on his resume. So I think that they structured this fight as really kind of a gift to Frankie Edgar because it's just giving him one last chance to become a two-division champion, while at the same time doing it to really kind of remind the world that Max Holloway is a champion at this division and get him in there against a notable name and get him another notch on his tool belt is the way I look at this fight.
Now, I know what you're trying to say, and I agree with the sentiment. I think it's a little more clear if you put it this way, and that is the UFC is finally doing right by Frankie Edgar. And, the fact is he had a couple of shots after waiting a long time against Jose Aldo. I don't know those, after sitting on the sidelines waiting for them for so long, I don't know if just those two shots really made right by Frankie Edgar. I think he could say, hey, give me one more shot. And they do sort of owe him one. So I think they're making right by him, not sort of like, let's give him one more shot. I think they owe him one. And, everything else you said I think is totally accurate too. And I think right now the books have Holloway at minus 400, so 4-1 favorite. That's considerable. And I don't know, even if you beat Frankie Edgar, you're going to know you were in a fight. So, I don't know if 4-1's fair.
Yeah, I don't. I think those odds are way too lopsided because Frankie Edgar is still very game. He was looking solid against Brian Ortega until he got caught with a really nice elbow that set up that big uppercut that wound up finishing Frankie Edgar. That was the first fight Frankie Edgar was ever stopped in. And Frankie Edgar, I thought, did the right thing. He came right back and fought Cub Swanson in a rematch, very unnecessary rematch, and just dominated him.
Yeah,
Um,
I think the other thing to point out there that is an open question is the fact is we've had questions about Holloway and his ability to cut weight, and that may have been one of the reasons that they moved him to 155. Now with that failed attempt, it's like, all right, go back to 145. Did we forget that he's been pulled out of fights, been told that he can't fight, fights on short notice that he wanted to take, and things like that because of his ability to cut or his ability to get to the weight, and sometimes having issues such as uh, showing signs of concussive, of having a concussion in interviews and stuff like that. So with all that, I think all the questions come back here now. How's it going to be after that weight cut? Let's see that because that's a situation where you get older and the cuts get harder every time. They don't get easier. And Holloway just took a fight off in terms of the weight cut. He didn't have to get to 145. Now, this weight cut is going to suck so much more than the last weight cut that he did. And, this is just common sense stuff. So I think that there is an open question or at least in my heart, I'm feeling I want to see what Max Holloway looks like. I want to see what Max Holloway looks like on weigh-in day. And then we'll go from there is to see if he's a 4-1 favorite.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And also, I think another thing to talk about when it comes to Max here, the damage, man. I mean, he there was a lot of concern about him going into that Brian Ortega fight because of his neurological issues and him. He got pulled once for slurring words and wasn't medically cleared to fight and. Then goes in there and he puts on a great performance, but then he just took a lot more damage against Dustin Poirier, and as you said, he's cutting a lot of weight down here. Has he really had the time to recover from a fight like that with Dustin Poirier? That was just back in April. So he's only had 3 or 4 months after. I mean, he got his forehead split with a knee in that fight. Was really getting boxed up by Dustin in that fight. And I would also argue if you look at his resume, I'm going to have to bring it up to actually look at who he's been fighting. But they appear to me, just off memory, to be pretty much primarily just strikers and grapplers. I mean, you've got Poirier, pure striking, which he lost that fight. So we'll just look at his wins. Ortega is mainly a power puncher that has excellent jiu-jitsu, but he's not that great of a wrestler. Jose Aldo, he beat Jose Aldo twice. Definitely a striker. This is a guy who did beat Frankie Edgar twice, and people are looking at this as like MMA math. MMA math does not add up. And I'll explain why real quick on that. When you look at Jose, Frankie, and Max Holloway is an amazing striker. He's also an amazing volume striker. He gets distance really well. He moves really well. He was able to get Aldo's timing in both fights and then finish him in the third round both times. Aldo was able to beat Edgar twice because Aldo, one of his best qualities that he had, especially in his prime, was he's almost impossible to put on the mat. He is so hard to take down. And he was a better striker than Frankie is. I think Max is a better striker than Frankie is. The thing that I'm questioning is Max going to be able to stop the takedown the same way that Aldo did? I don't know. I don't know if we have any indication that he's as good of a defensive wrestler as Jose Aldo is. But then go further from there, you got guys like Anthony Pettis and Jeremy Stevens or Ricardo Lamas and Oliveira and Swanson. I mean, these are not the type of wrestlers that he's going to fight with Frankie Edgar. He's going to fight a guy who's very quick in and out with his feet, with his head movement, good boxing, and can transition with his up and down movement very well. I think this is a winnable fight for Frankie Edgar. I mean, I'm almost tempted to take the dog in this fight because if Frankie Edgar comes in here solid and is able to mix it up real well with Max and he's going to be motivated. Frankie Edgar, I think, is really getting slept on in this fight.
Yeah, I mean, Edgar is an exceptional striker for MMA. You know, I go back even to the BJ Penn fights and stuff. You know, Penn was noted for his striking and his mixed game and stuff like that. But Penn had a lot of knockouts. You know, he killed Carl Uno for and many things like that. Penn is a noted striker, and the bottom line is he outstruck him, and the in and out, the game. So if he is able to come in and somehow set the pace and make Holloway do a boxing match, maybe take a little less kicks or whatever it is, just dictate the pace, ring generalship. That could be the key to his victory. If he takes Max out of his ball game, he could be very elusive, and that would be land strikes and make sure Holloway doesn't land. Can he frustrate him? I don't know. It's a lot of reach and a lot of height.
I totally agree. And real quick, we do got to give a little bit of conversation about Frankie Edgar and just his legacy. I think this is one of the top 15 greatest fighters to ever be in a cage. I've said that for a long time. This is a guy who probably could have fought bantamweight the majority of his career. And he was a former 155 lightweight champion. He's been in there with big guys before. The size of Max Holloway is not going to be a problem. He's been in there with Benson Henderson twice. He's been in there with big guys in the past, man. He's fought that. The biggest knock on Frankie's career is those losses to Aldo. But, man, Aldo was a great champion, and that's just a stylistic nightmare of a matchup for him. If he can get through this win, if he could beat Max Holloway this weekend, that is going to be gigantic for his legacy. And I think there's a very real chance, call me crazy, that we could see him and Cejudo at 35. And just imagine, let's just theoretically imagine he gets through Holloway. If I was managing Frankie, I'd be sitting here saying, do not take any other fight except for a fight at bantamweight against Cejudo. And why is that? You could be the first guy to be a 3-division champion in the UFC. I think he could legitimately do that. Those are 2 fights I think he could win. And at that point, we might be talking about Frankie as the GOAT. I mean, and I think those are fights he can win, stylistically.
I saw Frankie come up when he was young and fighting out of the Jersey area. And I always knew he had some talent. I did some matchmaking there, and I never had a chance to work with him. My fantasy matchup was always Frankie against Eddie Alvarez. And, you're talking about 2 sort of undersized guys that had a lot of success in the UFC, both held belts. So it would have been a hell of a little local regional battle there if I'd gotten it done before both guys made UFC. Obviously, both guys went on to bigger and better things from there. But, yeah, I agree with I don't know top 15, because I just, you have a huge list of people that I haven't been through with a fine-tooth comb. But I agree with rating Frankie Edgar highly, and I agree that most experts will probably get it wrong.
Yeah, and I think he's been very underappreciated for a long time. I think that you take Jose Aldo out of the picture, he would have been a 2-division champion. I still think that he could have possibly beat Conor McGregor with his. I mean, he's a very good wrestler. And
he's the overwhelmingly at this point the guy who suffered the most for the whole Conor McGregor thing was Frankie Edgar, because he actually did sit on the sidelines and never got his shot. And when he got his shot, McGregor had moved on, the big money had moved on, and it became more of Frankie Edgar putting in, the blue-collar work.
And one last question about Max before we move on to the co-main. If he wins this fight, which he's favored to do, does he stay down there and fight the Volkanovskis and the Magomed Sharipovs and the Calvin Caters and Yair Rodriguez, or do they try to give him some time off to restructure his body and move back up? I think this is a great division right now. There's a lot of young talent coming up. But is he going to stay in there and fight like all these young hungry contenders and try to just dominate and become the featherweight GOAT? Or are they going to try to move? Because he's a big guy. But if he's going to go do the whole 55 experiment again, we talked about this when he lost. He's going to have.
He didn't look big next to Poirier.
No, he's going to have to take about but Poirier looked about like Max back when he was at 45. The difference is Poirier has been fighting at 55 and got himself up there in that way. Do they send him back up there and let him go the Poirier route where he's an unranked guy who's fighting into the top 10, then fighting just building his way up the ladder as he's getting bigger along the way and getting used to the division. What happens with him, do you think, if he wins this fight?
Look, I don't want to sound like an alarmist. I don't want to sound like somebody that, is going to harp on the same thing over and over in this case, but I am. And my problem with Max is he's a phenomenal fighter, and, you could bottle what he brings and hand it out. Everybody'd want one, to take down. So that's not the knock on Max. But the problem to me with Max is that, we've got incidents. There is a medical history already there. So that puts him at risk for more medical problems of the same kind. Are we forgetting all of that stuff? Are we forgetting fights where they said, no, you cannot fight because you are not going to be able to clear the medical? Fights where he goes to an interview and he's incoherent in an interview. Now, again, those are precedents. They happen. There's nothing that can erase them. And that's why every time Max Holloway fights, they should be brought up, because that history becomes very important to me. Are you going to rush him into, if you're going to move him to 155, I think Max Holloway is in a hard position, because Max Holloway is a decorated champion, made the assault to 155, didn't quite make it. Now, if he wants to go back, it is a year's worth, and maybe taking 2 or 3 fights against lesser guys, but lesser guys who are going to be hungry, and we're going to say, you know what, they're treating me like a doorman, and and I'm going to ring Max's bell. They're putting him in a dangerous situation. Likewise, leaving him against up-and-coming Tigers at 145 with a big weight cut is leaving him in a dangerous situation. So I don't know. I want to see this fight to tell you what we see next with Max Holloway, because since we go fight to fight, what happens if this fight, there is another bad reaction to his weight cut? What happens if we're looking at a canceled fight this weekend because of that stuff? Are we really free from worrying about that? Nobody's mentioned it, right? Is it really something that might not happen? It's much more likely to happen with Max Holloway than it is with any other fighter right now.
Especially after going up to 155 pounds, where he put on some weight to try to to be bigger for that weight class. Probably expected to win that fight. Thought he'd then go on to fight Khabib later this year. That was definitely probably their plan. Dustin Poirier ruined it. Now he's going back down to 45 3 months later. That's a very good chance, Miguel, that he misses weight this weekend, and that soils this whole event. But let's move on.
I think what's best for the sport would be, this is not what's going to happen. What would be the best scenario would be, hey, Max Holloway put away a lot of good money in those last few paychecks and stuff like that. He invested and he hit, and he doesn't need the money, and he retires. And that leaves the 145-pound belt open to a bunch of young guys coming up, and that leaves, the 155-pound, as deep as it is now, it doesn't add another killer to it, but it doesn't lack for a killer, for killers right now. So, you're sending Max into dangerous territory. Like I said, I hate to be an alarmist, but nobody looks at the medical history of a fighter. There's no analysis of that. They're like, did he pass his medicals? Yeah, okay, good. He's good to go. Man, some of those medicals, his brain scan, he was suspended, so they may have asked him to bring another brain scan. But now that sits on file for 3 years. What good does that do the fighter or anybody? It's just a piece of paper in a file cabinet. If a trauma actually were to happen to Holloway, no doctor is going to get any benefit from that. There's no history of CAT scans every fight or anything like that. So, yeah, I believe Max Holloway is somebody that the medical analysis of him should play a part in what comes next for him.
Completely agree. And do you want me to go ahead and give it the pick?
Yeah, go ahead and do the pick, and then we'll move on and check out Cyborg.
I think with everything that we just mentioned here, I'm going to go on a gigantic limb. I'm calling Frankie Edgar by decision.
All right. Yeah, I remember watching Frankie against BJ Penn. The fight was in Abu Dhabi when Frankie won the belt. So we were watching it in the afternoon at work, and I'm watching it with a crew of guys that films our fights from our show down here and stuff like that. And I remember them watching the fight, and everybody was like, oh, We all watched the fight, and everybody was like, BJ won, BJ won, BJ won. And I said, I walked out of the room and I said, I'm not so sure that BJ won that fight. And when I walked back in, they had announced Edgar, and I felt very justified about it, And, I think Edgar's a guy who Edgar makes it dangerous for you to take it to the cards against because he's very unorthodox and because he can't control the pace. So, I don't disagree that if Edgar wins, it's most likely going to be by decision.
I think that people and it's not like I haven't given this fight any thought until tonight, Miguel. It's when I analyze this situation that's going on with Max, with him going up in weight, taking that beating, and then going back down, and the big weight cut, and the fact that he's not fought somebody like Frankie, and the fact that Frankie's going to be coming in motivated. And why I think so many people are counting him off is because of that Ortega loss. But man, he wasn't fighting bad against Ortega. And that was a much more dangerous fight, I think. Because he didn't really want to take Brian Ortega to the ground. Brian Ortega's excellent jiu-jitsu guy. And Ortega's styles make fights. This is a fight where Max Holloway is going to try to use his movement, pick him apart like he does with his boxing. And I think that when you look at the style, the in and out, up and down style that Frankie Edgar has, and how he keeps his hands high, he's not going to be an easy guy to just sit there and land shots against. And I think that he's going to really be pressing this fight to go to the ground. And I'm just going to go on the limb. I'm going to go with Frankie Edgar in this fight. I think the stars are aligning for him, and I hope he gets it done.
Yeah, I hope if he does, I hope it's not because of a medical situation or some type of negative outcome with Max Holloway. I hope he just beats him fair and square. Moving on, we got a featherweight bout in the co-featured spot, and we're bringing in Felicia Spencer to take on Cris Cyborg. Cyborg in the unusual position of having to bounce back from a loss, and she got her clock cleaned against Amanda Nunes. Word is that Dana White wanted the Cyborg rematch, felt that it was basically one of Nunes's, next bouts or common sense bouts. And Cyborg said, I don't want none of that. So here we get her in a bounce back fight against Felicia Spencer. We'll see where we go with Cyborg from now. How do you see this one? Does Felicia have a shot?
Yes.
Give it to us.
I think I might call Felicia Spencer here. She looked like a monster against Megan Anderson. This girl has tree trunk legs and is a very highly decorated wrestler. And for her to even want to step up and fight Cris Cyborg so quickly, she's clearly not intimidated. Undefeated girl, former Invicta standout. I hope maybe it's just wishful thinking because if she wins, I think we actually have a interesting matchup for Amanda Nunes going forward. Without her winning, I don't feel like there's a fresh face for Nunes at this point. Felicia Spencer looked like she had serious wrestling and a very heavy top game that it's going to be really hard for Cyborg to really deal with. And if Cyborg's not able to get her out of there, she's not able to stop that takedown, I don't think she can grapple with this girl. So part of me is kind of leaning toward this is a 3-round fight, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to go with Felicia Spencer. I'm going with upsets.
Very, very interesting, and I agree. And I think, the bottom line is Cyborg was dominant for so long in MMA, without the loss on her record and stuff. So I think it does become, and now, she is older, and she's got to be questioned, well, what went wrong and things like that. So I think that the way she bounces back and the way her training camp may be going now and things like that, will dictate maybe how this fight goes or what version of Cyborg we see. The other problem I see with that, too, is, she's coming back on short notice and stuff like that or whatever. But one thing I know, the one sign I see that I really don't like is that she's already wholesale turned down the Nunes rematch. And, I don't know that decorated a fighter, should not want to get a shot at avenging. I mean, she did not get a chance to show anything. And maybe, yeah, but again, that comes back to the psychology and how she's going to enter this fight. It was a wrecking ball of a loss to her career, so there are a lot of open questions, and Spencer has the door open. I agree with you.
Yeah, and I'm actually just reflecting back on Cyborg's fight with Tanya Evinger. I'm even more confident in picking Felicia Spencer. She struggled to get. I mean, it's kind of a funny story, Miguel. Nothing against Tanya Evinger. She's a tough girl, but we're watching that fight that night here in my living room, and my buddy Adrian walks in. He starts watching that fight. He's like, "Man, who's that girl that's fighting Cyborg? She looks like she's the toughest girl at the trailer park." And that's kind of how I was looking at it too. Like, this girl is so slow, so flat-footed, no power in her punches, and Cyborg's literally struggling to get her out of there. I think it took her into the third round before she got her out of there. Felicia Spencer, man, has shoulders, man. She's got a back. She's got some serious legs. I mean, she took Megan Anderson down, and just there is no indication that Megan Anderson, who was a girl that was talking about fighting Cyborg a couple of years ago, there is no indication Megan Anderson will ever be able to compete with somebody like Felicia Spencer. She looked, I was watching that and I was thinking, that is the first, besides Cris Cyborg, 145-pound woman I've seen in the UFC that I think could be a legit, just dominant champion. Because Nunes can go down to bantamweight. I don't think Felicia Spencer can do that. But Nunes is still the champ. I'm calling Felicia Spencer. I think she wins the decision, and I think she's gonna be, after this fight, the one that people are gonna be looking to possibly put against Nunes. And I think we need to get to know this name. But there's one more fight we're gonna cover, right?
Yep, I got a welterweight bout coming up here with Niko Price, and Niko made us look good last time out as he won by knockout, and he's facing Geoff Neal, and Niko's going to walk in an underdog again today, and Geoff Neal at -340, Price at +280.
Yeah, I'd save your money on this fight. Geoff Neal's not worth putting $340 down on. I don't think. I think those are a little too high. But Niko Price, Niko's coming off that just brutal first round knockout over Tim Means, and he got those that crazy knockout over Randy Brown with the hammer fist from his back that were really impressive. But he's 1-2. 2-1 his last three. Geoff Neal, though, I think this is a guy who's gonna have a number against his name in a very hot division. Came off the Contender Series, is 3-0. Every time I think of Geoff Neal, I think of that head kick he landed on Frank Camacho. That was just so brutal. And then he beat a really good guy in Bilal Muhammad in his last fight. I'm going to go with Geoff Neal winning this fight, either by with the way Niko fights, I think it's going to be a stoppage because Niko will go for it. And I think Geoff Neal's just sharper and bigger and more powerful. But it could go to a decision. But I'm going to go with second round TKO finish for Geoff Neal, and I think it's going to start getting people. I think his next fight after this will be a ranked opponent. He's a good fighter. So and I think that my prospect of the week pick is Felicia Spencer, even though she's in the co-main event. I just don't feel like she's as known as she should be. But if it wasn't her, it'd be Geoff Neal. And I think both these names are names to stand out and name to take hold of going forward. I think we'll see that this Saturday. But
yep,
I'm calling the two big upsets, Miguel, in the main and co-main.
The main events, and I think that's a bold move. I think that's a cool move, and I think in this case, you may look really good afterwards, and or we may look really good afterwards. Because I'm not saying I'm not signing off on those picks. They're good picks, especially when you consider the odds and things like that, and you toss some money around, and there's definitely a shot there at winning some open stuff. And it's basically because the guys in the main event that have the facade of being dominant do have a lot of open questions, on the psychological end and sometimes even on the medical end with Max. So, definitely an interesting UFC and one you want to keep an eye on. Anyway, I'm Miguel Durrani. That's Devin Miller. We've got a little bit long reviewing and previewing UFC 240. Dev's made some picks, and you can hit subscribe and like. We talked a little bit about medicals and things like that. I did a podcast previously today around Maxim Dadashev, the boxer that passed away, and what really could change around medicals at the boxing commission. So if you're interested in that, take a look at that video. And I'm Miguel Dorati for the CRP.